it's TheFrXion here, Tag Tank 12, having call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today taking another look at a premium tank once more. Today it's the CS-52 LIS, a Polish tier 8 medium tank, and it's probably one of the best tier 8 premium medium tanks in the game. A very competitive vehicle, incredible 100mm gun if I have that correct. Let me check real fast. 105mm gun to be fair, with very decent penetration rate, decent survivability, nice mobility, and decent concealment and spotting. So today we're going to be taking a look at what makes this tank special and if it's worth picking up in the near future. So CS-52, let us take a look at everything, but first, what other tanks would you actually be grinding for when you get the CS-52? So we're looking at the Polish medium tanks. You can see that I've basically played every single one except for the CS-63. The Polish medium tanks are a lot of fun, but some of them are a bit underwhelming. At least the CS-53 needs a couple of buffs, but it's a very nice tank too. The CS-59 I've enjoyed quite a bit because of the very high DPM that you have with that tank. And the CS-63 I still have to get around, but it's a line that I've enjoyed quite a bit. So, CS-52, what can you expect of this vehicle? Well, basically it is kind of like a Soviet tank that has some better accuracy, and it has a different kind of gun. It has a 105mm gun, and it has 320 alpha damage. So that's a pretty nice amount of damage that you do with a single shot. I have had some very nice rolls of 400 and above 400 damage. I had one game that will probably be featured in this one where I was rolling up to 450 damage with the AP shell. That is basically the max you can go with 320 alpha damage. 208mm of penetration is quite neat. The AP shell is going to be good enough against other tier 8 and tier 9 tanks, but against those tier 10 tanks you will have to utilize APCR ammunition. So let's take a look at the different shell types that we have and then have a little bit of a talk about a couple of things, because one or two things are quite ridiculous about this tank. So first and foremost, alpha damage on the APCR shell are exactly the same. High explosive shell has more alpha damage, but doesn't have the same amount of pen, and the shell velocity is quite a bit different. So with 208mm of penetration with the 105mm AP shell and 252mm with the APCR shell, what you will immediately notice is that the shell velocity is completely different from the AP to the APCR shell, and it's quite ridiculous. The AP shell has 980 meters per second shell velocity, while the APCR shell has a whopping 1,569 meters per second shell velocity. That is basically 5 or 6, almost 600 meters per second better shell velocity than the AP shell. So keep that in mind. The high explosive shell doesn't have a lot of penetration. That is why I'm not packing a lot of high explosive shells. I probably should go down even further and pick some more APCR shells, because you only have 35 rounds on this tank. That is one of the major downsides. When you play this vehicle, it will run out of ammo if you have a very good game, because the DPM is actually quite damn good. So let's take a look at the rate of fire. Rate of fire, as you can see, is at 7.6. That is with Brothers in Arms and with Gun Rammer Class 2. I've been running this setup and I've been running it quite successfully, also with vents. Gun traverse speed is pretty damn good. The gun depression angles are very decent for a Polish or Eastern European tank. 7 degrees, 17 degrees of gun elevation. The aim time is very good, 2.1 seconds, 0.32 with the dispersion, so it's a very accurate vehicle as well. And the DPM, as you can see, is quite high with 2,433, and you can improve it even more if you use premium consumables all the way to 2,539, and you can improve it even more if you're using bounty equipment. But you know, that's not what you're probably looking into this for, because I'm not expecting anyone to be really running this with completely premium consumables, because it's, well, players are trying to earn credits with these tanks and they're not trying to burn them most of the time. This tank doesn't have a lot of hit points, but it has quite an interesting armor setup. 80mm at the front, 75 on the side, 45 at the back on the hull, 190 on the turret front, 110 on the side, and 90 on the back. You will bounce occasional shots on the turret, but anything that has more than 230, 40mm of penetration will probably go right through the cheek right here. I've bounced a few shots, but as soon as bigger TDs turn up, they usually kind of ignore your armor and go right through. There is a cupola on top, which isn't the easiest to hit, but it is there. So if you're unable to really go through the cheeks, you can still go for the cupola. Now the hull armor, which is 80mm thick at the front, with the angling, is still quite strong, but it's not as strong as, per se, like the 122 TM, which has a whopping 120mm of frontal armor and some additional angling there as well. But I think the survivability aspect or the protection on the vehicle is sufficient enough for anyone playing a medium tank. You will survive a lot more shells than, for example, the STA-2. Moving on to mobility, this tank has 50 kilometers per hour top speed, and it loses a little bit of power to weight ratio if you're not using a turbo. With the turbo, this tank accelerates very quickly and it has better top speeds, and you'll actually be able to reach the 55 kph mark quite often with the turbo. So I would pretty much use the turbo. It's going to help you out and it's going to assist you to be even faster and to be more mobile. Traverse speed on the vehicle, 47.99, is pretty damn good as well. At least for a medium tank, it's very good in my opinion. You're going to be able to turn around quite quickly and you'll not have a problem getting run around in circles. Concealment and spotting wise, the tank itself is, it's about average. Spotting wise, you have 380 meters base view range, not the best, so maybe using coated optics could be something of value for you. But you could also just use premium consumables, and then you can see that if you use that, spotting goes up to 438 meters, and you don't even need to have premium consumables. You could also just train your commander in view range, and if you get everything out there, it might just be enough for you. I personally like to have more view range, so I've been thinking about exchanging the gun rammer for, not gun rammer, but vents for coated optics. But at the moment, I've been having quite a good time with this setup, and I don't think I'll be changing anytime soon. Now, I went with light alloy mounting points, improved sight, anti-reflective headlight coating, because they all give me the things that I need. So I get more traverse speed, I get better accuracy, and I get more concealment. I think the downgrades you take are worth it for me, but they might not be for you. So, take a little bit of a look, but most of the time for medium tanks, this is the setup I go with, and I'm doing quite fine with that. So, let's talk about the equipment. I don't think that the turbocharger is needed on this vehicle, because without the turbocharger, your specific power to weight ratio is still good enough to get you to top speeds without, having to resort to the turbocharger. But I don't think you need improved rotation mechanism. I don't think you need that. I don't think you need additional grousers, because you already have pretty good traverse speed, and your maintaining top speed is also decent enough. You could just put, I don't think you need vertical stabilizers either way, because the tank is fairly accurate and the dispersion values are quite low. So you could go with improved ventilation in the first slot, go with gun rammer in the second slot, and finally go with, even improved hardening to get more HP. But generally speaking, this is the setup that I've been having quite a lot of success in, and I've been enjoying this tank quite a lot. I don't think you need improved aiming, you don't need vertical stabilizer, you don't need enhanced gun laying drive, you don't need the improved rotation mechanism. This is already, from the outset, a very, very good tank where you don't need to improve it upon with a lot more things. You can just run premium consumables and the tank itself is already going to be quite impressive. So, I'd say we jump over to the gameplay, and I'm going to show you guys what this tank is all about. So, the gameplay I've prepared for you guys is in a tier 8, tier 7 match, and this is where this tank is going to be the strongest by far. Now, as I mentioned, this tank has a very, very good gun. This is a gun that is extremely competitive. It doesn't have the best penetration out of any tier 8 medium tank, but 208 millimeters of penetration is more than enough to really do a lot of damage at tier 8 and 7. There's currently a fly sitting on top of my screen, and I really want to swat it because it's hella annoying, but I'm just going to ignore that feeling, because we're going to be talking about what this tank can do for you in the right setting. So right here you can see there's a T-34-3 pushing into the middle. We have a WZ-120 who has hit us for a whopping 415 HP. This is going to be a reminder that your tank is armored good enough, but it's not going to be able to sustain a lot of hits, especially from tank destroyers. So whenever you play this vehicle, be very cautious of your HP, because you do not have a lot of HP. 1,300 HP for a tier 8 medium tank is maybe the norm, but that 1,300 HP does go down very quickly, especially if you're in front of a tank destroyer. So we're currently holding the middle. We've just engaged the FV-201, and I want you guys to take a look at the numbers that we're going to be rolling in just a second. This is a FV, tier 7 British premium heavy tank, trying to, trade with us. Not a very smart thing to do, because we just put a 400 damage shell into his lower plate. He in turn bounces, and now he has enough, charges us, takes a 454 damaging shot right into the tracks. And well, you have to know that that was probably a max roll on this vehicle, because your alpha is at 320. 454 is a roll that I haven't seen before on this vehicle, and I will probably not see in the near future again. That poor tier 7 light heavy tank just had his entire world shatter very quickly, and he just didn't have any more will to live. That's why he rushed us. So right now we still have this WZ-120. We want to control the middle, we want to push this WZ-120, and at the same time we're also hoping that our heavy tanks in north are slowly but surely taking care of those two vehicles that are still in the channel. Now, this tank certainly has enough mobility to get you from this point to the other point, and we could move away and maybe help out the IS-6B, but I did take a quick look at the HP, and as it turns out, both of the tanks, or all three of them, have enough HP to take care of those other two vehicles. So now with a charioteer on our hand, or on our side, we should be able to overwhelm this WZ-120. It is still a very dangerous tank, don't get me wrong. Very dangerous tank that can really hit hard, and unfortunately for us, the charioteer right behind us is going to really feel the brunt of that 120mm gun. I'm still worried about pushing in, because I don't want the WZ-132 to appear out of nowhere, and I don't want to get into a crossfire with the WZ-120, the WZ-132, and the T-71 that is sitting right here somewhere. The very beauty about this tank is it has some very nice DPM. The rate of fire is very nice, the alpha damage is fairly adequate for a tier 8 medium tank nowadays, and I think the armor also holds up quite nicely too. So overall, you basically have a very competitive tier 8 Soviet medium tank that combines gun depression, at least 7 degrees of gun depression, with armor of the Soviet tanks, with a very punchy and dangerous gun that usually the Western nations have, where the Soviet vehicles usually do not have the best guns. They also don't have the best ammo loadout for that. But with this vehicle right here, we have a very nice mix of a lot of different things that make this tank fairly competitive. I've played over 70 games with this vehicle. I've had a lot of good games, but I've never managed to get an ace tanker on the CS-52 LIS, which is quite weird, because the ace tanker actually is quite difficult to achieve on the CS-52 LIS. So right here, we're waiting for the IS-6B to push in. To be fair, we could have taken the hit right there so that the IS-6B didn't have to take that big hit from the WZ, but at the same time, the IS-6 didn't really complain, and I didn't want to drive out because the WZ-120 has a very nasty rate of fire. So I'm sorry if anyone feels a little bit attacked that I kind of used that IS-6 to my advantage in that situation. But all is good. He's still alive. We managed to push the WZ-120. So as I mentioned, the gun handling is very good in this vehicle. The rate of fire is very good. The tank feels, generally speaking, very, you know, like very powerful, and I think it's one of the best tier 8 medium tanks in the game. So currently you've only seen what I have been doing against tier 8 vehicles. What about tier 10 tanks? Is this gun still going to be competitive and competent against tier 10 tanks, especially tier 10 heavy tanks? Is that still going to be a possibility for us? And actually, to be fair, I think you guys will be quite surprised in certain scenarios, because I think the tank is fairly competitive, even at tier 10. We're going to jump over to a gameplay, and then we're going to have a final verdict, and hopefully you guys will know what the CS-52 LIS is all about, and if it is a tank that does speak to you. Okay guys, I know it's another match on Prokhorovka, and I think I've covered Prokhorovka in the last couple of weeks quite often, but somehow I am constantly getting Prokhorovka, Malinovka, and the Pearl River map. Like, it's as if there are only 3 maps in rotation currently, but either way, it's a great game, or it's a decent game for the vehicle. I don't really know what the outcome of the match was. I think it was a win, but right here you can see us pushing the middle. F6, this is a very common spot, either on E6 or F6, depending on which side you are. And 203 millimeters or 208 millimeters of penetration actually does suffice to go against E75's side armor. And because you have some very nice DPM, you have a very nice reload time, we're able to actually punish that tank twice for 600 HP. So that E75 just lost quite a bit of HP to a tier 8 premium medium tank who basically just had some casual shots on his side armor. Now in this match I don't really even have to utilize premium ammunition because I don't have a lot of credits currently in my account, and I need every single credit that I can get. So what I'm trying to do right here is I'm trying to find a spot where I can actually penetrate the E75 and the 60 TP without taking any incoming fire. Luckily for us, there's no artillery. We did just lose our E100, who was very aggressive on that ridgeline, and he got absolutely smoked by basically every other tank destroyer on the enemy team. So for us, it's very important that we keep these 2 or 3 guys at the E6 position lit up, so that the tank destroyers and the vehicles on top of the hill at least have something that they can return fire on, because as you can see, the STA-1 and the Standard B both are currently fighting STB-1, who has managed to put himself into a very dangerous position where he will not be able to have any more impact on the game. But, as I mentioned, gun handling is pretty good in this tank, rate of fire is pretty good in this tank, the average penetration is good enough to still go through the majority side armor of tier 9 and even tier 10 tanks. And right here, we're just waiting for the perfect moment to put another shell to the E75, or maybe punish the 60 TP. Now, these guys are no idiots. They know I'm sitting right behind the bush. They know I'm waiting for the perfect moment. So right here, I'm just taking a little bit of time. The STB-1 goes forward, and I think the STB-1 tries to put a little bit of pressure on the E75 and the 60 TP. Now, the E75 is a tank that we do not want to eat a shell from. Tank with 490 alpha with the big 128mm gun. So it's really essential for us that we do not get hit by any of these tanks. 60 TP and the E75 both will deal massive amounts of damage to us, and then we're going to just be stuck around 60 or 50% of HP after a single shot, depending on how high they roll. So when you're playing this tank, when you're playing this position, you might just want to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more cautious with your movement, especially if the majority of your team is hiding all the way at the 1-2 line which obviously makes sense because they're tank destroyers, but at the same time doesn't really provide you with a lot of confidence in your team's ability to fight back when you have to deal with an E75 and a 60 TP all by yourself. Now, there's an IS-3, unfortunately, for us, in a very good position in the dip, but since we actually did push a little bit in terms of spotting and in terms of concealment, it shouldn't be a problem. The tank itself has enough concealment to work just properly, and you don't have to be too worried about an IS-3 that is about 300 meters away. What you have to be much more worried about is the E75 that is sitting right in front of us, where we completely fluffed the shot because we suck at the game, and the tank that is sitting on top of the hill. We know that there is a Burasque somewhere on the 0 line, so we should really be careful with our engagements. We don't want to overexpose ourselves. We don't want to stay somewhere and try to just stay low. That's the main objective right now. We want to do damage to the 60 TP, and finally we're able to hit the lower plate, and the lower plate of the 60 TP is not strong enough to withstand a 208mm shell, so finally we're able to deal some damage on that tier 10 tank, because we have to do something about that vehicle, because in the end he is going to be our biggest adversary right here. Even the side turret is actually not that much of a problem for the 105mm gun right here, and this is one of the main reasons why I enjoy this tank so much. So I am putting a little bit of pressure on the E75 and the M46 Patton. That was a big misplay by me, where I just lost 511 HP to that E75 because I was greedy and I should have just stayed back. Now that E75 obviously is in a very good position, and with the support of this E4, who's also in a very aggressive position but not a very good position, well, these guys could easily just move over the ridgeline and push us, but it would cost them quite a lot because the majority of our tanks is currently sitting at the back and they would be helping us with sniper support. But still, AP shells on this tank, they just feel very good. I don't have to utilize a lot of APCR shells unless there's some really heavily armored tier 10 tanks, because I most of the time don't like to spam premium shells because I don't have the credits to run that, and in the end that also means that my combat effectiveness is probably not at the highest level that it would be if I would only be using premium shells and equipment and consumables at the same time. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind when you play this tank is that you do not have unlimited ammunition. 35 shells or 35 rounds is not the most in the world. So whenever you have the ability to, wait and aim properly, do that, because you do not want to be one of the guys who runs out of ammo because he's constantly firing and doesn't do any damage. So right here, unfortunately, we've angered the 60 TP. This guy is now going to be a bit more of a problem for us in a second, because they've just overtaken hill, and when they overtake hill, we're looking at a very dire situation where we no longer have any more sniper support. So what we're trying to do right here is just to hold this corner and not get too aggressive, so that the 60 TP can just roll up and nuke us. At least he has to, make himself available. But still, he manages to snipe our cupola, heat shell, which obviously wasn't necessary, but it is going to do the job. He rolls quite nicely, 789 damage right there, and he knocks our tank out. So this is the main complaint I have about the CS-52 LIS. Other than that, I think every single thing about this tank is decent and great. The tank doesn't have a lot of HP. Especially at tier 10, you have to be extremely cautious. When you get caught outside somewhere, your tank is not going to stand for a very long time. Unfortunately, this is just the nature of World of Tanks at tier 8. And this is the nature of World of Tanks with the +1, +2 matchmaking, or -1, -2 matchmaking. So you'll have to just kind of get used to it. But you have to be extremely wary of your HP, especially against tier 9 and tier 10 tanks. You can see it only took us 2 hits by E75 and S60TP, and we were sent back into the garage. But I still think we had a little bit of an impact, about 3,000 damage combined, which isn't the world. But in a setup like this, where you are thinking you aren't going to be able to touch a E75 or a 60TP, we still managed to deal quite a bit of hefty damage to both of these vehicles. And we were definitely a nuisance to the E75 and the 60TP. Now, if we move on over to the verdict, is this a tank that I would recommend to players? For all medium tank players, this is a very good tank. This is a very, very enjoyable vehicle. Even for non-medium tank players, players who like to play heavy tanks, I think this vehicle certainly is going to probably fit your playstyle. You can be aggressive with it. You might not have the best armor for super close range engagements, but your armor is going to still work in a lot of situations. You have decent enough mobility to get you from point A to B, wherever you need to be, and spotting, concealment are decent enough. The gun handling is great, the penetration is decent, you have very, very good APCR shells, which do lack a little bit of penetration in terms of not having more than 252 millimeters of APCR penetration, but they do fly extremely fast with 1,590 meters per second shell velocity. So overall, this is probably one of my favorite tier 8 premium medium tanks that I really always enjoy to play, and you can see how difficult it is actually to get a mastery ace tanker on this vehicle, because I'm currently still on 2nd class, and I've played this tank quite a few times. So yeah, I'll have to play it more. Maybe I'm going to try to free market. That's going to be a tough journey because this is a very, very well-liked tank, and yeah, I guess that would be a challenge. Either way, I hope you guys did enjoy this review. As always, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one, and enjoy the sun.